In this episode of B.Hooked Crochet, I've teamed up with my friends over at Yarnspirations to bring you a free pattern and tutorial for an easy cable headband. If you've never worked crochet cables before, this is the perfect project to start with. The first thing you'll need to do is find the free pattern over at bhookedcrochet.com/cable headband. You'll gather your supplies and we'll get started right after this. The first thing we need to do is create a slip knot. And then place that loop on your hook. And this headband is worked from one side to the next. So we're going to start on one end, we're going to increase a little bit, we'll work a straight section, and then we'll work a decrease. So think of this headband in terms of 3 different sections. So the first section, we're going to start with 9 chains. Once we have our 9 chains, we're going to locate the 4th chain from the hook. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm just going to flip my chain over to the back so I can see that back bump. I'm going to work a double crochet into that back bump, the 4th chain from the hook. And then we'll just make 1 double crochet into each remaining chain. So at the end of this row, we'll have a total of 7 double crochets, and that does include our chain 3. We are counting that as a stitch. At the end of row 1, this is what our work looks like, and we're ready to move on to row number 2. We're going to chain 2, and this does not count as anything. We're going to be working with back post double crochets for this particular row, and the chain 2 just helps us to account for the height difference. So the first thing we need to do is locate our first post. You can see that right here. This is our first stitch, and we need to make 2 back post double crochets around this post. Now first, let's talk about the back post double crochet. What we're going to do is work our hook towards the back, and you're going to have to wrap it around and then catch that post and come out the other side. Then we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop and yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through 2. So the motions of the double crochet are pretty much the same. The only difference is the placement. So we worked it around the post, and we're calling it a back post double crochet because we're pulling the post towards the back. Well, we need to increase for this first section of our headband, so we're going to do that at the very beginning and at the very end of each of the next few rows. So we're going to make a back post double crochet around the same post, so we're increasing by 1. Now don't get your post that we just made, this one right here, don't get that confused. We're not wrapping it around that, but we're going around that first post. So you'll wrap your yarn, bring your hook around, catch that post, yarn over, and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. Now that completes our increase. We have a total of 2 stitches now, and we're ready to move on to the next post. So we're going to make a back post double crochet around the next post. So I'm coming in, working my hook from back to front, catching that post and sticking it back out the back. And we're just going to keep doing that. We'll save the increase for our last stitch here. So we're just going to work a back post double crochet around the next few posts. When you've made it to the end of your row, we have our 2 back post double crochets around the front. We've made 1 back post double crochet into the next 5 stitches. And when we have our chain 3 remaining, remember I said we're counting that as a stitch. That's where we're going to work our last 2 back post double crochets. It's a little bit easier to get to from this angle. We're just going to go in and then simply wrap the yarn, pull up a loop, pull through 2, pull through 2, and repeat that one more time. So wrap the yarn, catch the post, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, and pull through 2. If you're having a little trouble with these back post double crochets, don't worry if you have to rip it out and try again. They do take a little bit of practice, especially the back posts. They're a little bit more fussy than working a front post double crochet. So just stick with it, and a little practice will go a long way. So we're moving on now to row number 3. We are going to continue increasing, and now we're looking at the right side of our work, and this is what it should look like at this point. So we're going to chain 2 to begin row 3. Again, that chain 2 is not counting as a stitch. It's just to help us with that height difference. And we're going to locate our first post for this row, which is right here. Now this time we're going to work with front post double crochets, which are so much easier to work than back post. You'll just wrap your yarn, grab your post, and you're kind of just going in the side. So we're keeping the hook on the front side of the work at all times. So just going in from one side to the next, then you can wrap the yarn, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 and 2 to finish the first front post double crochet. Now we're increasing, so we want to do that again. Wrap the yarn, find the post, and work your front post double crochet. Now you can see I'm having to use my fingers a lot. I'm really holding on to things, probably covering it up just a little bit, and that's really one of the secrets to working with back post stitches. Sometimes you kind of have to just fold your work and put it in a position that makes it more comfortable to work in. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is make 1 front post double crochet into each of the next 7 stitches. So I want to locate the next post, and if you have to stretch it to find it, that's totally fine. Insert your hook from side to side, pulling that post frontward. Work your double crochet. So that's 1. We want to do that a total of 7 times. And that's basically just going to get us to the end of the row. We're going to have 1 stitch remaining, and we're going to increase again. Now when you get to the end of your row, don't get this chain 2 confused. So I'm isolating these last 2 posts that I have. I'm going to work a front post double crochet around that second to last stitch, just like I normally would. And for the last post, which is right here, so my chain 2 is here. I'm ignoring that. I'm going to work 2 front post double crochets around this last post, and that's going to increase once again. So at the end of row 3, we'll have a total of 11 stitches, and I don't think I mentioned it either for row 2. At the end of row 2, you'll have 9. So we're increasing by 2 stitches for every single one of these rows. We started with 7, 9, 11. To begin row number 4, we're going to chain 3 this time, and that's because we're doing a little bit of a transition. The post stitches here are going to be the start of our cable, but we are going to have a couple of stitches on either side of the cable that are not post stitches, that are just double crochets. So after you've made your chain 3, you'll turn your work, and then you want to find the same stitch that your chain 3 is coming from. So you can see it nice and easy right there. We're going to make a double crochet there, and what that does is increase by 1 because we've worked that post into the same place that our chain 3 is coming from, and again the chain 3 counts as a stitch in this case. Now we're going to work with those back post double crochets again. We need to make a total of 9. So we're just going to wrap the yarn. You'll find your first post, and this might be the hardest part for you. What I find makes it a little bit easier is turning my work over on the front side so I can actually see that post. And then I just like to hold on to it or just put my finger on it, just some way of letting me know that, hey, that's my first stitch. That's where I need to work my first back post double crochet. So that's 1 of 9. And then you'll just continue down the row. When you get to the end of your row, after you've made 9 back post double crochets, you should end up with 1 post left. And that's this little guy hanging out right here. Well, we're not going to work a post stitch. We're just going to work 2 normal double crochets into that stitch. So I like to turn it in this direction here, find the V, because that's where I'm going to work my 2 double crochet stitches, and just work them as you normally would. And with the end of row number 4, we will have a total of 13 stitches. Now we're moving on now to row number 5, and we are going to increase, but we are going to start our first row of cabling. But don't let that scare you, it's not super complicated. We're going to begin row 5 by chaining 3 and turning our work. And the first thing we want to do is locate the stitch that our chain 3 is coming from. We're going to increase by making a double crochet into that space. And then we're going to find our next stitch right here. Again, you can look at the post or you can look at the V up at the top to help you find that next stitch. We're going to work a double crochet there. And these are going to be just those plain stitches on the side of the cable. So the cable is going to be nearly the entire width of the headband, but it's going to stop where your post stitches are. So it's going to be this wide where my 2 thumbs are. So our cabled pattern does have a repeat on its own. It's actually a 4-row repeat, but I don't want you to start keeping track of that repeat right now because we're still increasing. So still think of this as section 1 of the headband. The next thing we want to do is make a front post double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. Now we're going to do the twist, that traditional cabled twist. We're going to skip 3 posts and we're going to focus our attention on the last 3. Now I'm going to stick my finger right here because that's where I want to work my next stitch. But since we're stretching across such a large area, we need to use a longer stitch. So instead of using front post double crochets for the twist, we're going to be using front post treble crochets. That means we're going to wrap the yarn 2 times around the hook. You'll find that 4th post, and you're inserting your hook the same way as if you were doing the double crochet. The difference is how many times you yarn over and pull through 2. So I have an extra loop on my hook, so we're going to pull it through 1 extra time. Now we're going to do that 2 more times. Find your next post, wrap that yarn twice, make a front post treble crochet, and again. Now this should be your last post, your post stitch. So we have one part of the twist done, but what makes it a twist is kind of that we have a crisscross going on. So we have them going in this direction. Well, now we need to get some going in this direction here. Now this part is a little bit fiddly, I will warn you, but it's not too bad once you get the hang of it. We're still going to work with front post treble crochet stitches, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap my yarn twice, and then I'm going to find the first of the 3 stitches I skipped. So this is the first of the 3 I skipped. I'm just going to work my hook back around. I'm still going in from one side to the next in the same direction that I always am. It's just a little bit odd feeling because we're going in the wrong direction. We're going backwards. And you'll just work your treble crochet, your front post treble crochet, like you normally would. Now we need to do that 2 more times. We have 2 more posts. You can see them right here. And just work your front post treble crochet around that second one. And again, you can kind of just watch how I'm holding the yarn. Watch how I'm holding the work and how I'm sort of folding it to make this a little bit easier. These are going to be good tips to help you work through this stitch and get used to working with these odd stitches. Okay, so once we have that completed, we just have a couple things left to do. We're going to find our last post, which you can see right here, or you can look at the top and find the V. We want to make a double crochet into that stitch. And since we are counting our chain 3 as a stitch, that is going to be our last stitch. And we are increasing on this row. So we want to make 2 double crochets in that 3rd chain. You can kind of see it here. The 3rd chain likes to kind of shrink up a little bit, but you'll work your hook into the chain, work a double crochet, and then work another double crochet in the same spot. So once you've made it to the end of row 5, you'll have a total of 15 stitches. That's actually going to be our final stitch count. So we're not going to increase anymore, but we're going to move on to row number 6, still treating this as part of section 1. We're going to chain 3, turn our work, and then we're going to find the next stitch. So we've been increasing in this one right here. But since our chain 3 counts as a stitch, we can't work a double crochet there unless we want to increase. So I'm going to find the next stitch. And I like to look at it from this angle because I can just see the little hole right there. So this is the first stitch, the second stitch. Just work a double crochet in that second stitch. And then we're going to do that one more time. We'll find the next stitch, work a double crochet there. And now those back post double crochets. So you should start to see a pattern now. We're obviously looking at the wrong side of the headband here. Whenever we're working on the wrong side, we're going to be working with back post double crochets. Whenever we're working on the right side, we're going to be using front post double crochets. Okay, so this row is actually quite simple. We're just going to make 1 back post double crochet into each of the next 9 stitches. So that's all of the stitches involved in our cable, and then we'll work a double crochet in the last 3. The part that likes to trip people up is where we have this twist. Now we're going to talk through that. I'm going to keep flipping it back and forth so you can see where I'm working. So the first thing I'm going to do is find my first cable or my first stitch right here. That's where I'm going to work the first back post double crochet. So again, you can kind of just hold on to it with your finger, wrap your yarn, and then work your back post double crochet around that stitch. Now you'll find your next one. We're going to work a back post double crochet around that one. And the third one right here. These 3 aren't so bad. The first 3 are pretty easy to find. It's actually the next 3 that really like to hide. So the next 3 are behind this crossover right here. You can see them when you stretch things out. So those are the next 3 stitches I'm working into. From this direction, you can see them right here. So these are the next 3 stitches. So this is stitch 4, 5, and 6. So I've got my finger on this first one here, and I'm going to work a back post double crochet around that one. And sometimes it doesn't quite flow through as nice as you would like. Now working through that next one. This one's a little bit easier to get to. And then the third one right here. Now we have 3 more back post double crochet stitches to do. These ones are really simple and easy to get to. They're these stitches right here. Just work your back post double crochet. Now you will see that there is a little bit of a gap here, and that happens with cables. You're going to see it. There's really no way around it, but what I like to do to keep things a little more tidy is to make this back post double crochet as tight as I can. So I'm first just going to get my hook into position, yarn over and pull up a loop. But when I do that, I'm going to make sure I'm keeping this really super tight, because the tighter the stitches, the more it's going to close that gap. So that's why my fingers are nice and covering the stitches for you to see, but see how much it sort of closed that gap up. Now work your front post double crochet, your back post double crochet around those next 2. And then we have 3 stitches remaining. We're going to work a double crochet into each of the last 3. So I've got 1, 2, and the third one is that chain. With that, we finished up the first section of our headband, so we've covered rows 1 through 6. We practiced our increasing a little bit, started the cables. Now rows 7, 8, 9, and 10. Those are going to be our repeat for the cabled pattern. We've already covered pretty much all of the techniques that we're going to need to make this cable, but we're going to go through these next 4 rows so you can see it all come together a little bit more. All right, so starting with row number 7. Of course, we're looking at the right side of the work, so that means we're going to work with front post stitches. We're going to begin by chaining 3, which does count as a stitch. We're going to make a double crochet into each of the next 2, so this one and this one. And then we're going to start our cabled pattern. So we are going to be alternating a couple of rows here, and it's basically how we start this cable. So back in row number 5, we started the cable with 3 front post double crochets, and then we did the cross. Well, we're going to repeat, or alternate that rather, by starting with the cross and ending with 3 front post double crochets. So to start off with that cross, we're going to skip the first 3 stitches, and we're going to find the next 3. Now you can see these 2 pretty clearly. That third one is hiding behind this little crossover. We're going to work with front post treble crochets because we're stretching across this long gap here. So wrap your yarn twice, find your 4th post stitch there, and work a front post treble crochet around that one and the next one. And then that last one. So you can sort of just grab this section and squish it over to the side and take your finger and poke it out so you can really have access to it. Work your front post treble crochet around that one. Then of course we have to go back. So we're going to work a front post treble crochet around these first 3 that we skipped. And once I put it through, I kind of just like to fold everything up just like that, so I can really work these yarn overs a little bit easier. Now find your next one, front post treble crochet, and then the third one, front post treble crochet. All right, so we have the cross for this row, the next thing we need to do is find the last 3 posts, and then we're going to make a front post double crochet around them. We're using the shorter stitch because when we do that, it's going to pull this crisscross over a little bit and make it a neater cable. So when you look at it this direction, this is what it should look like at this point. One of those characteristic things about cables is you have to work a few rows before you really start to see the pattern. So as long as your headband looks something like this, I wouldn't worry about it. You're probably on the right track. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is work 1 double crochet into each of the last 3 stitches. 2 stitches that we can see pretty easily, and our last stitch again is that 3rd chain. Now at the end of row number 7, our stitch count is staying the same. We're going to have a total of 15 stitches now for the entire section of, well, section 2. Row 1 or section 1, we talked about the increasing, so we kept track of the number of stitches in the row. We don't really need to do that now because we're keeping it the same. Now it's always a good idea to count every so often. That way you make sure you're not accidentally increasing or decreasing as you work through this pattern. So we're moving on now to row number 8. We're going to start with a chain 3. Just a little tip, we're always going to start with a chain 3 for the row in our repeat here. So this 4-row repeat for a cabled pattern. We're always going to start with 3 double crochets, our chain 3 included. So we'll double crochet in the second chain, or the second stitch rather, and then in that next one as well. And we're working on the wrong side of the work, so that means we're going to work with back post double crochet stitches. And to make things a lot simpler, anytime we do this, we're not actually cabling. We're really just making the pattern a little bit longer. So we're going to work 1 back post double crochet around each of the next 9 stitches, which are all of the 9 stitches in our cable, just like we did before. So these first 3 aren't so bad to get a hold of because they're the 3 that were by themselves. It's really just the crossed section that gets a little bit fussy. So just flip it over again. We're going to work with the stitches that are on top first. So those are going to be our next 3 to work our back post double crochet into. And again, you can sort of just flip your work back and forward just to make sure you're working in the correct stitches. A back post double crochet into each of those 3. Now the last 3 are on the inside of that cross, so we can see them really clearly here on the wrong side of the work. You'll find your first post there. Insert your hook in just like that. Work your back post double crochet. So do that for the next 2 stitches as well. And for the last 3 stitches, we're going to work 1 double crochet into each of the last 3. So this post, and our chain 3. So we're moving on now to row number 9. We're going to chain 3. Flip our work over, so we're looking at the right side, and you guessed it, front post double crochets we'll be working with, but first we need to make 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. Now the last time we worked our cabled row, we started with a cross first, and then we did the 3 front posts. Well, this time we need to change it up because we're alternating these 2 to give us the cabled pattern. So this time we're going to work 3 front post double crochet around these guys right here. And then we're going to do our crossed pattern. So we're going to skip 1, 2, and 3, and then do our front post treble crochet around that 4th stitch. And the next. And the next. So we've got 3 in a row there. And then we're going to work backwards now. We're going to work these last 3. We'll do a front post treble crochet around each of those 3. And finally, the last thing we'll do is make 1 double crochet into each of the last 3 stitches. We're moving on now to row number 10, which is the last row in our repeat for this second section of our headband. We're going to start with 3 chains, turn our work, make 1 double crochet into each of the next 2, and this is the wrong side, so we're working with back post double crochets, and we're going to make 1 back post double crochet for each of the next 9 stitches, or all of the stitches in our cabled pattern. So we're going to start with 1, 2, and 3, and then 4, 5, and 6 are hiding behind there, and then 7, 8, and 9. So at the end of row number 10, this is what our headband looks like, and we have gone through 1 repeat for the cabled pattern. Now, a lot of you asked me on Instagram if you would please make a headband that was easily adaptable, and I want to talk about that here because you can make this have a custom fit, but there are a little bit of limitations because there is a 4-row repeat. Now, the one thing that's important to note is that 1 repeat of the cabled pattern, so that's rows 7 through 10, is 2 inches long. The increased section here is 2 inches long, and the decreased section is going to be 2 inches long. So automatically you have to account for 4 inches for the increase and the decrease. So let's have an example. If you want to make a headband that's 22 inches around, or that has a circumference of 22 inches, we're going to go ahead and subtract 4 for the increase and the decrease. So that means we need to have 18 inches in the middle. Well, since our repeat is 2 inches long, we're just going to divide 18 by 2. So that means we need to have 9 repeats. All right, now that you know how to adjust the length, then that's what I need you to work on now. Just go ahead and work up the length of your headband. You can follow the instructions, the written instructions as they are if you don't want to fool with doing anything custom. If you just want to make it as it is and the size that it's provided, then you can do that. It'll tell you to repeat rows 7 through 10 a total of 7 more times. So that means we're going to have a total of 8 repeats. And then the next thing we're going to do is cover the decrease section, the last little bit of the headband, the length of it, and then there's just a couple things that we need to do to finish it up. Okay, so once your headband measures the proper length, the length that you want it to, or if you're following directly along with the pattern, well, you're going to stop on a wrong side row. So I went ahead and I worked my back post double crochets, and now I'm ready to start working on the right side. And that's where we're going to move into section number 3 of the headband, which is the decreased section. Now the other thing you'll notice is that this likes to curl, and that's nothing you're doing wrong. That's really just a characteristic of the stitch. And we're going to take a couple of measures to correct that and moving on with the next few steps. So the first row of the decrease, we're working again on the right side. We're going to chain 2, and we're going to work with double crochet 2 together in order to decrease as we work through this. So on this first stitch, the chain 2 is counting towards our first double crochet 2 together. So really all we need to do to decrease on an edge stitch here is find our next stitch and just work a double crochet there. And since we have just that chain 2 instead of a chain 3, it sort of mimics the look of a double crochet 2 together, and then we can ignore that in the next row, and we've decreased by 1 stitch there. Now the next thing we're going to do is make a double crochet in the next stitch. So we're still working on those stitches before the cable. And then we're going to front post double crochet into each of the next 9. So basically all of our cabled stitches. We're just going to make a normal front post double crochet into each of those. Now when you've made it to the end of your row, you've made your 9 front post double crochets, we're going to find our third to last stitch, just make a double crochet there, and we need to decrease once again. So we're going to decrease over these 2 stitches, a double crochet 2 together. So find your next post and just work part of a double crochet. So yarn over and pull through 2 once, and then leave these 2 loops on your hook. Then we'll yarn over and insert your hook into that third chain because this is a stitch, so we are treating it as such. And then we'll yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Now when you have these 3 loops on your hook, we'll simply yarn over and pull through all 3, and we've just decreased by 1 stitch and finished up that first row of our decrease. So at the end of that first row, we have a total of 13 stitches. You want to go ahead and count them, make sure you're on the right track before moving forward, and don't forget that the stitch at the beginning and the stitch at the end are technically counted as 1 stitch. So I find it easiest to count the V's up at the top. Just sort of hide that chain 2 with your fingers so you're not tempted to count it as a stitch, and then count along. You should have 13. So moving on to row number 2 of the decrease, we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And again, we're going to decrease over this next stitch, and that chain 2 is counting as part of that decrease. So we're going to do that in the same way. We're going to find the next stitch, so not this one where the chain's coming from, but the one right next to it. We're going to make a double crochet there, and then we've decreased by 1 stitch with that because it's counting as a double crochet 2 together. And then we're going to make 1 back post double crochet into each of the next 9 stitches, which is basically all the stitches for our cable. Then when you make it to the end of your row, you'll have your 2 stitches remaining, the 2 posts. Again, I'm kind of hiding this one here at the edge because that doesn't count as a stitch. And we're going to work a double crochet 2 together over these 2 stitches. So this is a decrease. We're going to wrap the yarn, insert our hook into the next stitch, and pull up a loop. Then yarn over and pull through 2, and then we'll leave it there. So we've worked half of the double crochet. we'll yarn over again, insert our hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and then we'll yarn over and pull through all 3. So we've decreased by 1 there, and now at the end of the second row, we should have a total of 11 stitches. And you want to double check that before moving on to row number 3. Now for row number 3, we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And we need to start with a decrease once again, but our next stitch is a front post double crochet, or is a post stitch here. So we want to do a front post double crochet on that first stitch, and then it's going to count towards a decrease with that chain 2, just like we did before. We just changed up the stitch there at the end. Now the next thing we want to do is make 1 front post double crochet into each of the next 7 stitches. Now when we get to the end of this row, we need to decrease again, but we are sort of blending 2 stitches together because we have a front post double crochet here, and then we have just a double crochet 2 together from the back that's counted as 1 stitch. So we want to maintain our stitch pattern, or the look of it. So we're going to double crochet 2 together, but just know it's sort of a hybrid between a front post double crochet 2 together and a regular double crochet 2 together. So we're going to find our next post, or the last one in our row, and work just part of your front post double crochet. So pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2 and leave it there. And then find your last stitch. So again, this is a decrease, and you'll probably find it's a little bit easier to just look for the post, and then directly above that, you'll see the V. Now go ahead and yarn over, insert your hook into that V, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, then yarn over and pull through 3. Now that finishes the third row. At the end of this row, we'll have a total of 9 stitches in our headband, and we just have 1 more row remaining. So we're moving on now to the 4th and final row of the decreased section, and we're going to start this off with a chain 2, just like before. So we want to decrease, and think of it this way. We have 9 stitches from row 3, and that basically means that each one of these post stitches, that's what we have remaining. So it gets a little bit confusing having this extra material here on the sides, but just pretend like that's not there, like it doesn't even exist. The only stitches that matter are the 9 that are from our cable. So we need to decrease again here at the beginning, and we're going to do that in the same way that we have the other rows, but I'm pointing it at this direction because I want to show you which post you need to decrease over. Now it's really tempting to decrease over this post here because it's the first one, but technically our chain 2 is coming from that stitch, and we want to avoid that because if we don't, we're actually not decreasing. So just hold on to that second post so you know where to work your back post double crochet. So we're not doing anything different here, just wanted to point out the stitch that you're actually working on. And then we're going to make a back post double crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. Now when you do that, you should have 2 post stitches remaining, or 2 stitches remaining altogether, and we're going to decrease over these 2 so that our final stitch count is 7, which is what's going to match our first side that we started on. So we're going to back post double crochet 2 together, these 2 stitches, and we're just going to work that just like we would any of the other decreased stitches we've covered here. So pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, then pull up a loop over that next post, pull through 2, and then pull through 3. So that finishes the bulk of our headband. It finishes section number 3. We can go ahead and fasten off now at this time, but there are some finishing touches that we need to do. And the first thing I would recommend doing is wet blocking. So you can see how this is really wanting to curl and just sort of take on the shape of the cable, and it does that. It's fine, it's normal, it's nothing you did wrong, but I would recommend wet blocking it. So what you're going to do with that is lay your headband out on a surface, and I'm actually working with a shortened version here to help you be able to see the entire thing all in one frame. And you're going to just stretch it out on your blocking board or whatever you have available to you and pin down the sides. We're not going to stretch it too much. I wouldn't suggest stretching it this way too much unless you want it to be a little bit wider. It's not going to be too much of a big deal if you do that. But I really recommend if you're trying to just get rid of the curl, stretch it this way. See how that sort of settles it in and lays it out. It's also going to give you a little bit of extra length if you are lacking at all, if it's a little bit shorter than you really wanted it to be. So you'll pin it down, stretch it out, saturate it with water, and give it a couple days to dry. I'll be honest, when you completely soak this, because it is animal fibers, it took mine at least 2 days to get completely dry. If you unpin it before it's completely dry, then it's not a big deal, but it's not going to hold its shape as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull in my full-sized headband, the one that I actually did wet block. So you can see the difference here. I mean, obviously this is an unblocked version. You can see what it wants to do. So I'll demonstrate how to sew the two ends together, and then we're gonna crochet a border around it to sort of get rid of these funny, wobbly looking edges. So here is my blocked version, my full-sized headband, and so yours will look something like this after wet blocking. It's going to settle down a lot more. The stitches and fibers are going to relax, and it's going to maintain the shape a lot better. So the first thing we need to do is stitch the two ends together. You can use whichever tail is longest. The tail that we fastened off with, that really should be your longest one. So that's what I'm going to start with. We'll just thread that on our darning needle. Now in some cases, depending on how you wear this section might be the focal point. It might be what is facing outward. So you do want to make sure you stitch this together as cleanly as you possibly can. Well, what I like to do is just take my end, find my first stitch on the opposite side, and work my hook under both of the loops of the stitch. And I'm just going to go back and forth. So I'm going to be working through the next stitch, catching both of those loops, and then finding the second stitch on the other side, pulling that through the next stitch, and the next, and just go back and forth until you get to the end. You do want to make sure you match up your stitches, so we have 7 on each side. That way our edges will line up evenly on both sides. And that gives us a pretty clean, nice looking join. So then what I'm going to do, I've got my two ends here. I'm just going to add a little extra security. I'm just going to make just one knot and try to make it as tight as I can so it's not visible. That's just giving this join a little extra security, and then flip it inside out, and we can weave these ends along the back side here. So the last thing we're going to do is crochet a little border around the edge to sort of make up for these wobbly edges. The little chains that are on the side there are sometimes not very pretty to look at. So what we want to do is just find our stitch right here. Insert your hook into that, and then we'll fasten on with a new piece of yarn. Chain 1. And then we're going to single crochet in that same space. Now we are counting the chain 1 as a stitch, so what I recommend doing, if you have a stitch marker, go ahead and place your stitch marker in that chain. It's going to help you know where to join when we get to the end. So the rule of thumb here is that we're going to make 2 single crochets for every row. Since we're working on the side row, I'm just going to jump up to the next row of stitches and work 2 single crochets around that. And I want to do it a little bit more loose than I normally would. That's going to help make sure it's nice and clean. Now it's a little bit more fiddly when you're working through these, the increase and the decrease. We sort of have to fudge it a little bit. We're not really going for a particular stitch count. The main goal here is just to evenly space the single crochets to correct the wobbly edges that we see. So the next thing I'm going to find here is, well, the stitch that I can see is right here. It's a post stitch, and I don't really want to single crochet there because I need to maintain and work on this edge right here. So all I'm going to do is make 1 single crochet into that space. And then I can see the next row a little more clearly. It's a little bit wider, so I'm going to make 2 single crochets there, just around that side stitch. Then it should be easy from here on out. Now that you are away from your increase and we're just working on a straight flat edge, just remember, rule of thumb is to make 2 single crochets in the side of every stitch. And we're just going to work that all the way around. So once you've worked that all the way around, you're back at your stitch marker. We're just going to join with the slip stitch to our first single crochet. So you can see where I have stopped my 2 single crochets on that last row. And when we join with the slip stitch, it's really going to reinforce this seam right here, which you can see is kind of loose. And this is going to make it a lot more secure by just slip stitching into the first chain there. And then we can fasten off. Leave yourself a tail that's just long enough to weave in. And you'll weave that in on the wrong side, just like we did for those other ends. And the last thing we want to do is just repeat that for the other side. So you'll join right where we did before, work your 2 single crochets in the side of each row. And once you finish it, this is what it's going to look like. Now you'll see that there are little decorative holes, and that's actually just because of how we worked the single crochets around the post rather than trying to poke our hook through them to sort of fill that gap a little bit more. And this is kind of, I consider it to be a little bit more of a decorative thing. I used to not really like the look of this. I think there's a time and a place for it, but I think it really adds a lot of interest to the headband. So you're just going to finish your second round here on the other side. You'll weave in all of your ends. At this point, you have all the tools to finish your headband, and I hope to see a picture on Instagram. You can tag me at B.Hooked or use the hashtag B.Hooked. I'll see you next time, guys.